The electrical response of neurons is a consequence of changing conductivities in ion channels in the membrane of the neuron. This was discovered by Hopf and Housley in 1950, and they explained this in terms of an equivalent circuit where each ion channel has a variable resistance that responds differently to the stimulus, so that the neuron creates an action potential, which is a fast rise of the voltage that is deactivated by another ion channel, and there's a rebound here. When these patterns are combined repetitively, they create the neuron spiking, which is the essential element of the brain for computation. The Hopf-Housley model and many derived models can be expressed into the form of some dynamical equations, and these equations lead to bifurcation. Bifurcation means that according to the variation of external parameters, there is a sudden change of the dynamical regime, so that first the neuron can be simply responding with a fast decay, or in another point of the phase plane, it can make a repetitive spiking. The analysis of bifurcations is done by the small perturbation or linearized equation, and this can be converted into impedance spectroscopy, so that we have an equivalent circuit representing the dynamical model and several spectra that can tell us the dynamical regime at each voltage point in the JV curve, and this is the analysis that we present here. This type of analysis has been done since many years in electrochemistry, for example. So these are results from 1995 from Kedam and co-workers. And this is a current voltage curve. It has a negative resistance sector going down. And as we move along the current voltage curve, there is a rapid succession of changes of the impedance spectra, creating negative features here at the left side, and they have a meaning of how the system is going to respond in time. And this is the analysis we want to generalize. So a first authoritative analysis was done by Mark Cooper in the late 90s, and here is a bifurcation in JV system, in JV curves, so that at some point the system starts oscillations, and this is associated to the impedance spectra. And again, one thing is related to another, so that the impedance can detect the bifurcation that sends the system into oscillation. This is Mark Cooper that clarified all this complex story. Why do we want to do that now? There are many reasons to understand this type of systems more generally, but in particular, there is an interest to make artificial neurons, to make a biological type of computation. It's called neuromorphic computation, so that then we can try different material combinations and characterize them by impedance spectroscopy, so that we have shown, for example, the impedance of the Hopf-Housley model. They are quite complex, and we need to clarify these spectra to find them when we make an artificial memristor and we want to turn it into a synapse or a neuron. And with these elements, we can build spiking neural networks and recognition of stimulus with intelligent response and a number of things that are interesting right now. We have to understand the response of certain basic elements. And in the case of a memristor, we have two equations. One is a current voltage equation, and there's a memory variable. And this memory variable has another relaxation equation that will say how it responds to the external voltage. So this pair of equations is a minimal model also for neurons, and this is our starting point. And from this model, adding a capacitor that is always present, like in the neuron model, then we have a series. We can linearize the model, obtain the spectra, and we come into this. First is RC, but then there is a negative feature here, which is the response of the inductor. And this is the basic model of the memristor, and it will create this negative feature that, when we compute the capacitance, creates negative capacitance. But here is all positive because there's no negative feature. But when we make the neuron, some resistance or an inductor has to become negative, and the neuron has to jump to the left side. And this is one important topic that I will explain here. This negative response has been found in many solar cells. This is our paper in 2006 with inorganic and disolar cells, and this was observed. So the inductor is a general dynamical feature in complex systems. We have some results on the impedance spectroscopy of neurons. We use the simple model of Fitz-Hogg-Nagumo that contains only two equations, and it was expressed by Nagumo in terms of an equivalent circuit. So here is the resistance inductor line, and here is the negative resistance element. So that is the same model that we. So the model has these two dynamical equations, and there is a fast channel that has the negative resistance and a slow current, and the slow current has a relaxation equation, and this gives the model we commented before with the RC and resistance inductor line. The negative resistance can be visible or not, but it's there and gives the destabilizing element. And the Hopf bifurcation will be achieved by starting from the positive pattern with the inductor and turning into a negative resistance at intermediate frequency. This was explained by Mark Cooper in his papers and is a central result. And now we will show how it works with continuous changes of the impedance. This is the JV curve of the Fitz-Hogg-Nagumo model, and we will follow the impedance coming from high voltage to zero voltage. And when we do that, we pass the Hopf bifurcation, that is the red point. Initially, at high voltage, the system is stable, so that it will have this pattern in which, starting from any point, the motion in the phase plane will make oscillation falling to this fixed point in which there is an intersection of the two node planes. And from any point, you can see that the flux lines being to this point, so that the voltage makes a damped oscillation. And this is the corresponding impedance pattern, which is has a real DC impedance, and it has also this inductor curve feature, so that when we move the voltage to lower voltage, we will have this pattern all the time until we arrive at the Hopf bifurcation. And now we are close to the Hopf bifurcation, so that it is developing already a negative part, because at the Hopf bifurcation is going to pass to the other side, to the negative resistances. And then here it becomes very large, because it's going to become infinite. And now from this point, we are now very close, and then now it passes to the other side, and we decrease the voltage a little bit, so we can see the other pattern in which the DC resistance is still positive. Maybe we can see better like that. The DC resistance is still positive, but there is an intercept with negative resistance. And now this is the corresponding patterns in which we have a fixed current at below the Hopf bifurcation, and then the evolution is totally different, because starting the fixed point is not stable. Starting from any point, we are going to fall into this limit cycle, either from inside or from outside of the limit cycle. We go into a limit cycle, and that corresponds to the oscillating, which is like the neuron firing, making beats when it fires. So this will go until the very low potential. So in summary, when we have the Hopf bifurcation, we cross to positive impedance, the stable region, and negative hidden impedance, the oscillating region. Since there is all this diversity of spectra in a problem where there are bifurcations, I have introduced a method of characteristic frequencies to classify rapidly all these behaviors and get an idea of the properties of the model from the experimental data. So if we take again the RC resistance inductor line, this model that is, for example, the Fitch-Nagumo model, when there is a part of negative resistance. In this model, this corresponds to an impedance function, and we can write this impedance function in terms of two types of constant. Some prefactors that set the scale of the impedance and the time, and a set of internal characteristic frequencies, A, B, L, and these characteristic frequencies will completely determine the shape of the impedance, not the size, but the shape corresponds to a combination of these three numbers. And here are defined the three impedances, and they generate all the possible spectra. And we have some additional useful numbers. One is the intercept of the horizontal axis. This red point is this frequency. Another is the intercept of the vertical axis. And the third is the frequency of oscillations, which is the square root of the determinant of the Jacobian. And we can characterize also the Hopf bifurcation, which is when this condition between the L and the B is satisfied, and then corresponds to this condition between the circuit elements. To have a Hopf bifurcation, one of the three elements has to be negative, or the three have to be negative. For now, we have seen examples in which R base is negative, and then this condition can be satisfied. So now we take again the Fitch-Nagumo neuron model, and then by plotting the trace and the determinant, we can see that in this case, the JV curve has no negative resistance. And the trace is positive in this region, approximately between -1 and 1. And by plotting the frequencies, we can see the Hopf bifurcation and the oscillation region. So that coming from high voltage 2 until 0, first we find a region that will have the inductor, because the orange line is real, and then here when the blue goes to 0, appears the green line, and this is the intercept with the vertical axis, and then here is the Hopf bifurcation with the impedance passing to the other side, and we can see these trends here. So we begin at high voltage, and then we have the inductor all the time, as it is said here. And then by going to lower voltage, this will grow. And this is 0.9. And here it's developing the intercept with the vertical axis. You can see there's an intercept already. Because now when we go to 0.9 more or less, it's going to go to the other side, because here is the Hopf bifurcation happening around here, and that will go until the voltage is 0. It's all the time the oscillating region of the neuron, as we can see here. We now apply the method of frequencies to the famous catalytic model of Cooper and Schluter's, where the current as a function of voltage has this shape. It has a Hopf bifurcation and a negative resistance segment. And if we see the stability plot, then the trace becomes positive at 0.23 more or less, and this is the Hopf bifurcation. And then here comes the negative resistance. And if we plot all the resistances, there is no special indication at the Hopf bifurcation. But there is something curious here, is that the inductor becomes negative after 0.4, and also the R sub A is negative. Both are negative in this region after the resistance becomes positive again around here. So if we look at the plot of frequencies, we find that the Hopf bifurcation is at the place where the blue becomes larger than the inductor frequency. Here there is an onset of the inductor feature, and immediately a crossing to the negative axis before the Hopf bifurcation. And when the omega sub O of oscillation decreases, this is because the DC resistance has become negative, and there is a passage to the negative resistance. The DC resistance becomes negative, and here it is recovered at 0.4 with negative inductor and negative A, but the quotient is positive, so that the omega L is positive all the time, and this is a double arc feature, as we will see. So now we check this prediction of features in the actual impedance diagram, and we start at 0, and we have a simple arc here, as there is no intercept, no green line or no orange line. And as we increase the voltage, here we have the first crossing. It is at this point, close to 0.2, where the orange becomes real and indicates the crossing to the appearance of the inductor line. And then immediately after comes the blue line is 0, the green line sets in, so there is an intercept, and now it passes to the negative side, still with the DC resistance positive, so that this is the oscillating region. Continues the oscillation. And now we are close to 0.32, And here the resistance will become negative, the DC resistance. So this happened now. Now the DC resistance is negative. And if we continue, at this point, for point 4, it's going to become positive again. So we're close now, and now here is the transition. It becomes positive at this side. So we are here now above 0.4 and continue. These two negative elements, inductor and resistor A, make a double arc structure, but still the resistance is positive and the omega L is not going negative. And this continues until we get to 0.5, which is the entire plot. Now, the last model that we study is different than the model before because it has a series resistance. This is taken from the book of Scholl about non-equilibrium phase transitions in semiconductors. What happens, this is also very common in electrochemistry, because if you don't have a series resistance, you cannot fix the voltage and get oscillations. But all electrochemical systems have the solution. They have a series resistance, and also this semiconductor model has a series resistance. Then we can have the voltage in the series resistance plus the internal voltage. We can put the model as a fixed voltage, external voltage, and it will still oscillate. The other difference with respect to the other model is that it doesn't need the RB line that was the stabilizing resistance, because now it can be RA, the resistance with the inductor can be negative, and it can be compensated to a total positive by the series resistance. So that is one example here in which the A resistance is negative up to 1 volt. And here is the region of instability with the trace is positive. And then we have oscillations. So now we are going to check this with the frequencies, writing the impedance in a universal form. And now we don't have B, but we have the omega for the series resistance. And we have the oscillating region starting at the origin, because here is when A is negative and it can destabilize. So initially we see only one arc, but this arc has, if we see a change of the arc, we see that the arc has this is the series resistance, which doesn't change, and this is the total DC resistance. So the DC resistance is smaller. It means that the internal RA is negative. And then here is the establishing of the inductor feature. We see that's the point where it happens. And then comes the Hopf bifurcation. And the Hopf bifurcation in a potentiostatic system is different because it is the admittance becoming infinite and the impedance having a 0. So here we cross, and this is the point where we have a 0 of the impedance, and that is the Hopf bifurcation that will make the admittance infinite. This is this point. We see the intercept part before the Hopf bifurcation, as we have. It's natural. First grows the intercept with the vertical, then the Hopf bifurcation, and then it continues. Now there is no oscillation in this pattern, and at 1 it will become the A resistance will become positive in this model, And here is the crossing where the air resistance become positive. And then at this point, 1.4 stops the inductive part here. And this is now all the features because it goes until the end, forming only one arc. I want to thank my colleagues in this work. They are especially doing the experimental work, and also show you my video course and my book in the physics of solar energy conversion.